What's going on, guys? Nicholas DeMario here of SterlingKisses.com. I recently came across a box of my old toys. Mostly 80s stuff. Classics like G.I. Joe, Transformers, Polly Pockets, He-Man. After a good couple of hours of playing with them, I was inspired. Wouldn't it be cool if He-Man had a real metal sword? So, being a jeweler, that idea turned into a pendant. More specifically, I decided I would make She-Ra's Sword of Protection. The plastic swords were a good way to show off the Delft Clay casting method, something I haven't done on this channel before. But first, the sword had to be trimmed down to give it a more elegant look. I also cut off that gross chewed up bit. I wasn't one to chew on my toys. I'm not sure how that happened. Honest. Here I'm just using a little bit of JB Weld to glue the pieces in place. In previous videos, I've gone over the lost wax casting process. This time, the Delft Clay method is more appropriate for what we're doing. It involves creating a mold using this very refined casting sand and making an imprint of what we want to cast. I didn't have a frame large enough for this piece, so I cobbled something together, complete with bolts that lock everything into place. The imprint is made, and cornstarch is used to keep the two halves of the mold from sticking together. I cut a few air vents to allow trapped air to escape, and cut a channel where our metal will be poured. I take special care to make sure that there are no bits of sand that could fall off into the mold during the pour. With the mold prepared and my silver melted, I'm ready to pour. Well, that could have gone better. I didn't get a nice smooth pour into the mold, so the result was an incomplete casting. The great thing about Delft Clay casting is that it's quick to reset. Instead of going through the lost wax process and waiting hours on end for another burnout cycle, I just fill the mold again, make the impression, and it's ready to cast. In my last attempt using the electromelt, it was too hard for me to aim the pour with such a small gate on this frame, so I decided this time to melt and pour the traditional way. Of course, my hand is blocking your view of this perfect pour. This time we have a complete casting. There's a bit of flashing around the edges, but that will clean up easily. And here's the casting pickled out and trimmed up a bit. The Delft Clay method does have its faults. If I wanted to make a bunch of these, I'd still be better off with the lost wax method. You can also get inconsistent or incomplete castings since you're just relying on gravity to make the metal flow through the mold, versus using a vacuum or centrifugal casting technique. It's also really easy to get small imperfections from bits of clay breaking free and lodging themselves in the surface of your piece. There's a few ways of fixing this. I could just keep grinding down the surface, but the pits are deep, and I'd lose too much of the design that way. I could fill each of them with solder, but that's not practical in this case. A laser welder would be perfect, if I had one. So the last alternative is to burnish them out. In the case of burnishing, you're simply pushing the surrounding metal over the imperfections with a tool that has a high polish. If it looks like I'm not doing much here, that's because I'm not. It was too difficult for me to work with the burnishing tool and film up close at the same time. So here's how it looks afterwards. The pits are filled, and a little emery wheel will get the tool marks out. This sword pendant is going to be set with a genuine emerald, and here I've scribed out where I need to carve out the seat. I test fit the stone and get it to sit nicely. I could have gone a little deeper and maybe pushed some metal over the top and bottom of the stone to secure it, but in the end, I decided to make prongs to hold it in place. Here I'm applying a bead of solder where I want the prongs. What I should have done first is drilled holes to keep the solder and prongs in place, but here we are, doing it the hard way. I'm also not sure why I wasn't using a third hand here to keep the piece in place, but again, doing it the hard way. With steady and even pressure, I use setting pliers to tighten the prongs against the stone. I finish up by going over the tips of the prongs with a cup burr and polish by hand. A bail is soldered onto the pendant, and then it's onto the polishing wheel. Now that it's nice and polished up, the last step is to add some gold plating to the sword hilt. And of course, I did make that metal sword for He-Man. And since I was on a roll, I also made another sword based on the new animated She-Ra cartoon. Hope you all enjoyed the video. By the power of Grayskull, I'm Nicholas DeMario of SterlingKisses.com. Thanks for watching.